Good morning again. I am pleased to introduce our third panelist this morning, William Mangold, who is an assistant professor in interior architecture and design at Drexel University in Philadelphia. Trained as a cabinet maker, he studied architecture and fine arts at the Rhode Island School of Design and Environmental Psychology at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Before joining Drexel, he taught at Pratt Institute and worked for the New York City firm Ivan Bryce Architecture. Guided by an interest in the interactions between people and place, underscored by dedication to social responsibility, his work bridges practice, pedagogy, and theory. Through teaching and scholarship, he integrates hands-on making with critical inquiry into atmosphere, materiality, and lived experience. He is co-editor of the People, Place, and Space Reader and recently published the Interiors Theory Primer, extending the theoretical discourse of the discipline. It brings me pleasure to bring up William Mangold, who will talk to us today about weathering, care, and the aesthetics of use. Welcome.
Morning, thank you. And to echo Rebecca's comments, this is a great place to be here this morning. It's a great group. I'm William Mangold from Drexel University, and I'm going to talk through 3 Philadelphia case studies that connect to the theme of weather. I'll start by asking a question. What does it mean for an interior to weather? I think that's kind of the question of the day. How might we think about the soft erosions, the quiet accumulations, or the sharper impact of human activity on the surfaces of our spaces? From polished completion to the traces of use, this paper explores how interiors weather through time, touch, light, humidity, repair, and use. And it suggests that this weathering is atmospheric through the layering of care, adaptation, and inhabitation. Atmosphere is often understood as something crafted, an effect of color, lighting, material detail. But atmosphere also accrues. It lingers in surfaces, rhythms, routines. And so this paper uses the concept of weathering to think about how atmosphere seasons through the aesthetics and ethics of use. Weathering refers to the gradual deterioration of material surfaces, whether caused by environmental exposure, human interaction, or institutional neglect. In architecture, David Leatherbarrow has framed weathering as a temporal process that reveals the interdependence between built form and environment, making visible a building's life in time. Extending this logic to interiors, we encounter a subtler but no less potent material vocabulary: worn floor tiles, scuffed thresholds, discolored paint, improvised repairs. These are not simply signs of decay, they are records of inhabitation, including care and adaptation. This paper argues that the aesthetics of weathering offer a counterpoint to design's frequent pursuit of clean and controlled environments. Drawing on Helene Forgeau's dirty theory, which frames dirt, in quotation, as a generative disruption of architectural purity, I explore how worn and weathered interiors challenge normative ideals of perfection. Dirt, in this sense, is not merely grime. It is ethical friction, reminding us that places are entangled with use, maintenance, and everyday life. Using 3 case studies, a public school interior, this is where my kids go to school in Philadelphia, a student thesis project, and a traditional Japanese house, this is Shofuso, also in Philadelphia, I examine how wear and weathering influence atmosphere over time. These examples do not treat decay as failure, but as evidence of care, labor, and belonging. They ask us to see the interior not as a fixed design product, but as a living environment layered with use. In doing so, they prompt a larger reconsideration. How might we learn to enjoy the weather? Greenfield Elementary in Philadelphia is a mid-century school whose spaces tell the story of decades of use, adaptation, and repair within the constraints of public school infrastructure. Its current state is not one that has been carefully designed or curated, so what emerges is an improvised atmosphere, an environment composed less by intention than by necessity, and yet rich with the material traces of care. Walking through Greenfield's hallways, one quickly notices this visual language of improvisation. Floor tiles cracked or have been replaced in patches. Walls show layers of different colored paints with really no effort to reconcile them. Ceiling panels are stained, sometimes replaced, rarely uniform. And yet, I want to argue that these signs of wear in Greenfield do not register as neglect. They actually reflect a low-level process of upkeep, commitment to functionality and safety, but also to continuity and presence. This atmosphere of improvisation is not incidental. It's actually a result of a system in which public schools, particularly in older cities like Philadelphia, are chronically underfunded and maintained through piecemeal interventions. I can get specific about the history in Philadelphia, but if you've seen the TV show Abbott Elementary, it's funny, but also very accurate portrayal of this system. Teachers often act as the de facto stewards of their classrooms, investing their own time and money to decorate, organize, and sometimes repair. Custodians, administrators, and parents contribute to a collective choreography of maintenance. The space bears witness to this collective labor, not through polish, but through the visible marks of lived use. I mean, I was just kind of stunned when I walked into the gym and saw this. Like, who did that? I don't know how, but I thought it was pretty fantastic. This material condition challenges dominant aesthetic notions. Where design standards often privilege visual coherence, public schools offer a counter-aesthetic. The space is held together not by uniformity, but by adaptability. Here, atmosphere is not designed in advance, but produced through care practices, patching, repainting, rearranging, improvising solutions with what's at hand. The aesthetics of this atmosphere lie in its irregularity, its accumulation, and its embrace of weathering. In this sense, Greenfield exemplifies the way Frigeau thinks about dirt. Dirt is not just matter that's out of place, but also that which troubles purity, precision, and control. Dirt, for Frigeau, is a material and conceptual excess that resists closure and perfection. Interiors are prone to this dirty entanglement. They are sites of use, of maintenance, of bodily presence and absence of things left out and things worn through. This case study also surfaces the politics of atmosphere. Greenfield's condition is not neutral. It reflects the structural inequalities in education funding, the invisibility of care labor, and the aesthetic expectations that we bring to public space, which sometimes are lower than we might bring to other spaces. Yet this difference is not only one of resources, it's also one of values. In its lived materiality, Greenfield invites us to shift our aesthetic criteria, to honor patina over polish, improvisation over uniformity, and care over control. As a case study, Greenfield Elementary redefines what atmosphere can mean in interior environments. It suggests that atmosphere is not always something we design from scratch, but something we inherit, we maintain, we adapt, and that wear can be beautiful, that brokenness can be instructive, and that interiors, especially civic and educational ones, can teach us not only about space, but about time, labor, and the ethics of use. The second case study focuses on a project called Inhabitable Ruins. It was a graduate thesis project by Taylor Gladfelter. She completed it last spring, which explores how deterioration and handicraft can be embraced as an aesthetic of memory and shared history. The project centers on Building 40 of the Frankfurt Arsenal. It's a 19th century military production facility located in northeast Philadelphia. Long empty, the building bears traces of industrial activity, wartime labor, and post-industrial neglect. Exposed brick, flaking paint, rusting hardware, all signal an architectural body shaped by weather, time, and abandonment. In this case, literally, like there are broken windows and the weather comes inside. Rather than replacing or sanitizing these conditions, Gladfelter reframes the building's wear as an asset. Her project embraces the ruin as a generative condition, a place where new practices of making, gathering, and teaching can emerge in direct conversation with the material past. Her thesis proposed interiors that do not erase decay, but work with and through it, augmenting existing textures, framing layers of peeling paint, and treating cracked plaster or exposed lath as material vibrancy. Her interventions were intentional: staircases that thread through crumbling voids, framed openings that expose structural scars, flexible partitions that acknowledge the layered messiness of adaptive reuse. The building becomes a palimpsest, inviting interpretation and co-authorship by future occupants. Students and makers, the people that she envisioned to work here, would not only be users, but stewards of the space, engaged in ongoing cycles of use, repair, and reinvention. Like Leather Barrow, this project suggests that weathering is a form of aesthetic completion, a way that places come into full visibility through time. As Leather Barrow writes, time is not the enemy of architecture, but its medium. By preserving imperfection and advocating for adaptive coexistence with decay, this project enacts a quiet resistance to the logic of replacement, efficiency, and control. This project reframes weathering not as a problem, but as a deepening of experience. In doing so, it raises critical questions. What kinds of spatial practices are enabled by embracing deterioration? How might the aesthetic of ruin invite new habits of care and inhabitation? And how can we design in conversation with entropy rather than against it? And again, I think that these are kind of central to the conversation about weather at a different scale, or the scale of the interiors. In this project, we can see interiors as temporal records, atmospheric accumulation, and spaces for ethical remaking. The third case study turns to Shofuso, a 17th century style Japanese house and garden located in Philadelphia's Fairmount Park. Anyone been? If you have a chance, it's a great place to visit. Originally designed by architect Junzo Yoshimura for the MoMA courtyard, it was a kind of exhibition of traditional Japanese work in the 1950s. It was taken apart and reassembled in Philadelphia in 1958. While not ancient, Shofuso has aged in place. Its joinery, wood surfaces, and exposed materials recording a half-century of seasonal cycles, visitor activity, and caretaking. As an interior, it offers a striking example of weathering as both aesthetic sensibility and cultural ethic, an embodiment of wabi-sabi values and material impermanence. Within Shofuso, weathering is anticipated as part of the milieu. Unsealed cypress boards, tatami mats, shoji screens, and paper transoms all invite interaction with air, moisture, light, and time. The architecture is porous. Air flows through the open engawa. Sliding panels allow spatial reconfiguration and ventilation. And rain splashes against the edges of the veranda. Each element registers this use, this weather. Discoloration, where hands slide open the fusama panels, subtle buckling of floorboards, soft erosions at the thresholds. These effects are neither defects nor distractions. They are central to the interior's atmosphere. Unlike Western practices that aim to fix materials in a static, clean, or new state, traditional Japanese maintenance routines involve cyclical replacement, surface care, and respectful acceptance of impermanence. Joinery is oiled and tended, but not necessarily sanded or concealed. Parts that rot or become damaged are carefully cut out and replaced. In these ways, the place is sustained through an ethic of care, one that values responsiveness over control and renewal over restoration. I'd suggest that this creates an atmosphere of calm attunement within the house, a feeling of temporal presence. This is actually a class I took there. I taught a class, Nature Inside, and it was kind of wrestled with a lot of these issues. The building invites slowness. Its textures, scale, and asymmetry cultivate awareness of change. Water trickles through the site. Air stirs paper. Wood expands and contracts. This is weathering not as breakdown, but as experience, an atmosphere that arises from dynamic reciprocity between humans, materials, and environment. In contrast to the improvisational repairs at Greenfield or the embrace of deterioration in Gladfelter's thesis, Schafuso represents a formalized, even ritualized embrace of impermanence. And yet all three case studies foreground the issues of temporality and care. Each invites a rethinking of atmosphere as something that accrues, and of interiors as environments that weather. In a very literal way, Schafuso challenges the modernist expectation of interiors as isolated from the weather. Here, interior and exterior are fluid conditions, not binary zones. The Ngawa wraps the house, blurring the line between shelter and exposure. Visitors remove shoes and pass through thresholds that redefine the relationship between body and building, inside and outside, permanence and change. This framing of interior space as open to weather both materially and metaphorically suggests broader implications. It invites designers to imagine interiors not as sealed containers, but as evolving ecologies. And we can ask, what happens when we allow the outside in? What becomes possible when we invite materials to breathe, age, and fall apart? In the context of this paper's broader argument, Schafuso provides a culturally grounded example of how weather and weathering can help us think differently about interiors. It offers an alternative to the default paradigm of deterioration as a problem, and instead positions atmospheric change as a dimension of design. Taken together, the three case studies, Greenfield Elementary, Taylor Gladfelter's thesis, and Schafuso, suggest a compelling range of attitudes towards weathering and ways that the interior is tended in response. Though culturally and materially distinct, each reveals how interior atmosphere is not only designed, but accrues over time. Each suggests strategies for working with deterioration to deepen connections to place. And each challenges dominant aesthetic norms that privilege newness, smoothness, or control over evidence of lived inhabitation. In all three examples, atmosphere emerges through time, shaped by daily life, environmental forces, and patterns of care. In Greenfield, improvised repairs and mismatched surfaces form an unintentional atmosphere of use and adaptation. In Gladfelter's thesis, deterioration is framed as an aesthetic opportunity, inviting creative responses to surfaces marked by abandonment and erosion. In Schafuso, weathering is ritualized through cycles of maintenance, encoding impermanence within an ethic of attentiveness. What connects these three cases is a reframing of interior atmosphere as a temporal and social phenomena, an accrual. Rather than a static condition, atmosphere, like weather, is revealed as an evolving pattern of human, material, environmental interaction. This shift from product to process, from perfection to patina, offers a powerful counterpoint to prevailing design logics. Across all three case studies, deterioration does not signify neglect, it signifies relationship. The weathered interior is not simply worn down, it is worn through use, care, and proximity. What might first appear as loss is in fact an index of connection between people and materials, past and present, design and inhabitation. At Greenfield, mismatched repairs are traces of collective labor and an atmosphere of resourcefulness and care. In Gladfelter's project, decay is not hidden, but framed, narrated, and co-authored by new inventions. Weathered surfaces hold multiple temporalities. Deterioration is not erased, it's made meaningful. At Shofuso, deterioration is not just accepted but anticipated. Materials are allowed to weather gracefully, and their eventual repair is integrated into an ethic of stewardship. The weathered interior becomes a space not of loss, but of layered presence, a site where time, use, and care deepen our connection to place. Weather requires maintenance, and each project suggests a different relationship between care and design authorship. In Greenfield, repairs are reactive, born of necessity and constrained resources, yet they constitute a form of spatial authorship, a small gesture of agency that accumulates into lived texture. Gladfelter's thesis imagines a proactive role for designers in embracing decay, not fixing, but framing, revealing, layering. Shofuso, by contrast, embodies an ongoing choreography of care, a centuries-old logic in which stewardship and wear are inseparable. These cases trouble the boundaries between intention and use, creation and maintenance, profession and inhabitant. They prompt a reevaluation of authorship, not as origination, but as participation in a temporal and ethical continuum. What if maintenance itself is recognized as design work? And I think that was a theme of one of our earlier conferences, right? Central to this inquiry is the idea that imperfection and impermanence are not flaws to be solved, but conditions to be honored. As Frigeau proposes, the dirty, the weathered, the residual are not outside design, but central to its ethical and environmental responsibilities. Together, these frameworks of imperfection and impermanence call for an expanded aesthetic, one that values wear not as degradation, but as expression. And this aesthetic has implications for sustainability, of course, by shifting focus from novelty to endurance, from polish to patina. We might reimagine sustainability not only as a technical performance, but as cultural practice. Weathered interiors ask us to live with and care for what exists, attending to what is already there, already marked, already aging. Ultimately, this paper argues for an ethic that considers weather as a condition that shifts our way of seeing and making to embrace impermanence and imperfection. It foregrounds temporal depth, material vulnerability, and shared responsibility. Such an ethic resists the fantasy of the sealed, pristine interior and instead embraces atmosphere as emergent, contingent, and open to the outside. The ethic would involve designing for change, allowing materials to age, shift, and adapt, valuing maintenance not as afterthought, but as creative and ethical practice embedded in the process, and embracing repair, improvisation, and imperfection as expressions, and reframing atmosphere not as affect that's fixed, but as a temporal ecology. This approach calls for a more patient, humble, and reciprocal relationship between people and these places. As weather continues to intensify, climatically, politically, materially, the ability to live with atmospheric change becomes ever more critical. The weathered interior offers both a metaphor and a method, a reminder that to dwell is to care, and that every surface tells a story, not of what was designed, but of what has been lived. To live well, we must learn to read the weather, what we heard from the beginning, the subtle shifts in light, in mood, in material tension. Weathering teaches us to inhabit time, not to resist it. And perhaps that is the ethical challenge for interiors, designing not to shelter us from the weather, but inviting us to live within it. Thank you.